Hello, and welcome to School Leader Soundbites. I'm your host, Veronica Sofer, and I have the honor of coming to you every week, dropping new episodes of our podcast where we talk about school communications, public relations, marketing, and advertising. So, if you are looking for some content on how to improve your school district's visibility strategy, you have found the right place. I come to you every week with more than 20 years of experience in school communications, and I love talking about all the things you need to know to improve your school district's presence in your community. So let's go ahead and get this episode started. But before we do, don't forget to hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of School Leader Soundbites. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, drop us some comments. Let's talk about what it means to be new to the C-suite, whether you call it cabinet or whether it's the E team. I know every district has that leadership council, that core group of leaders that are supporting the superintendents. We all call it something different. Let's talk about what it takes to get there, and then how you need to show up to be successful once you've got a seat at the table. So many of our school leaders are matriculating up from the campuses. They were either former teachers and then team leaders, assistant principals, and then they work their way up to central office. Right. And so we've led teams of all different kinds, of all different sizes, with different levels of expertise. And then we came into administration. A couple of things that I've always observed when principals come up to central office. Number one, they don't walk around as much. That's for sure. So there's a little bit of a adjustment, both mentally, physically, not getting that daily touch of connecting with students. I know, especially at the elementary school level, being able to just leave a heated conversation or your office and go right down to the pre-K wing or the kindergarten wing to see the cool things that are happening, and just have those little friends come up to you and just be like, "Oh my gosh, I love your shoes. I love your hair. You're so pretty." All the little things, right? That really fills your emotional bucket. That doesn't happen at central office. I guarantee you, when you make your way to the C-suite, you do not get that type of daily reinforcement, not only from your fellow chiefs or your fellow assistant superintendents or associate superintendents, but you sometimes go a week or two without even seeing a student or having a student interaction. So when you're new to the C-suite, there's a couple of things you need to know. Number one, you have to know what it is you need to fill up your emotional bucket and keep yourself motivated to be who you need to be for not only your team, but for your community, for your superintendent, for your board. And you've got to be able to know when it's time to refill that cup, right? Or that emotional bucket. You need to know when you're being triggered and what it's going to take for you to get right back to where you need to be to do the work that's so important. One of the other things you need to know is how to really feel comfortable in your own leadership style. So I recently have been coaching a couple of school administrators who are really coming up through the ranks. And one of the challenges, not only that I've observed and that I have personally felt, but I've seen more recently than not, is this idea of being someone that you think they want. You've got to trust yourself. You interviewed for the position, you've proven yourself in the roles that you've had before. You know to follow your instinct and to make decisions that are going to support not only your school system, but your students and for your staff. But not showing up authentically is one of the biggest mistakes we can absolutely make. And that is much easier said than done. I'll be honest with you. In my very first role as a communication leader for a school district, I was a little on the younger side. Everyone that worked for me was at least 15 years older than me. I had a newborn, and I didn't necessarily look the part. And so I was told when I got hired to dress older. I interviewed twice with my hair up in a bun. What they didn't know is that I had just had a baby. And so my hair wasn't where it needed to be after going through 9 months of carrying a baby. And so I wore my hair in a very professional tight bun, which made me look a lot older, a lot sterner. I was definitely wearing that power suit with dark colors. So I looked older. Again, I just had a baby. And so I wasn't showing up authentically. I was showing up as a very masculine, older energy in those interviews. So I get the job, and I'm reminded of how important it is to physically show up looking older. So for the first 6 or 8 months, I stepped into that because I thought that's what they wanted. And I remember thinking how much more energy it cost for me to show up in a way that wasn't my true authentic self. So within a year or two, I got some really great advice. Some from some, my fellow C-suite members reached out to me and they were like, "Don't be afraid of your age. Don't be afraid to come with this really young experience. With the fact that you do have a newborn and you don't have students in the school system yet, but you will in 3 or 4 years. So come with that perspective, bring that to the table." What I had to learn was that I had to be comfortable in who I was as a leader, which was a very young leader, a leader who hadn't quite experienced all the things that my colleagues had experienced, but that I could still bring something genuine and authentic and true to the role. And it was, the birth of social media. And we were still faxing documents when I got my first directorship in the communication space. I literally had 80 campuses. I was a director and I was 28 years old, 29 years old, turning 29. And we were still using a fax machine. So I needed to bring to the table what younger parents expected from the communications of a school system. Because sure enough, within 4 or 5 years, I did have a student in the system and what it took and the types of communications that were emerging, like texting. Right, those emergency notification systems were new to school systems, and the only reason why I'd heard of them was because in New Orleans during Katrina, part of some of the parishes were able to notify families instantly because they had emergency notification systems. But not every school system did. Today, we all have them. Today, the expectation is text messages and phone calls and instant direct push out messages. But at the time, that was new to the space. So I tell you that because I realized that I was fearful of being authentically me. I didn't have a brand developed. I didn't have my color palettes, those phrases, those philosophies, that real true north that directed me to who I wanted to be as a leader. 20 some years later, as I'm coaching young people in new to the role, and not necessarily young by age, but new to the role, and as a cabinet member, what I'm finding is that they haven't invested time in investing in their brand. So, number one, showing up authentically is going to be key. You show up authentically when you've done the work to establish a brand for yourself, right? You know what you're about. You know what your personal mission statement is or what your vision is. I know some cabinet members and superintendents and aspiring superintendents who literally have a strategic plan for their career. They've mapped it out. They've done the research. They've got measures. They've got all the metrics that they're identifying. They've got KPI, key performance indicators. They are ready for the opportunity when the right job comes to step into that next role. Now, not everyone has done that. Not all of us are wired that way. But if you have a strategic plan, a blueprint for your career, you've outlined your personal mission or your vision or your values, and you have assigned it the visuals to go with it, start using those immediately. Even if you're an assistant principal, but you know you have aspirations for that C-suite position or that superintendency, put all of that hard work and planning that you've got into place, put it into play with visuals. Make sure your colors align, make sure your fonts align, make sure your signature line or your personal philosophy or beliefs or that those one or two quotes that really speak to you as a leader, start using them. Use them as much as possible when you present at a conference, when you are communicating with someone, when you're writing a handwritten thank you card to someone who's offered you some mentorship. Make sure that they know exactly what you're about because your brand is your promise. So, showing up authentically, having a true brand, and more importantly, a track record. And what I mean by that is, you'll find if you're not a sitting superintendent yet, you will find that when you do step into that role, it's your annual evaluations are incredibly important. And a lot of us have quarterly evaluations that are done. So sometimes it's going to look different in every district, and every state's a little bit different, but there are going to be generally some solid core metrics that you have to look at. Too many times I've had superintendents reach out to me and say, "I have my evaluation in a month and I don't even know where to start, but I need a document. Can you format it for me?" Absolutely, I can format it for you. But more importantly, let's talk about what's in it. What are we measuring? What does that look like? What does it sound like? Do you have artifacts? Do you have links to videos? Do you have data points that have been turned into infographics? So when the board is looking at your evaluation, they can see it and really get a sense of progress that's happened. And you can do that with financial information, curricular information, community engagement information, HR information. All those kinds of things are going to be really, really important. So having a proven track record, and what I like to remind people to do, and I work with my coaching clients on this too, is to make sure in your personnel folder, your digital personnel folder, that you either organize it by month, because oftentimes we'll remember, oh, the budget cycle happens in this time of the year, or evaluations happen on this time of the year, or whatever it is you're working on. So organize it by month, put all those artifacts in there, tag them, especially photos and videos, because those play really well when you're going through your evaluation process. Or the flip side of that, which is name those folders by topic. So maybe it is, redistricting, rezoning, doing boundaries. That's one of our favorite things to do in the school district world, is rezoning, and how you engage with the community. Give examples of the types of communications that went out. How many people opened them? How many people read all the way through them? How many people clicked through to the website? Be able to show that you were doing what you said you were going to do. And that's a track record. And I always like to tell people, especially if you're new to the job, that you want to set that benchmark, because if you come back 2 or 3 years later and say, oh, I've made progress and here's proof of it, that's not quite as impressive as coming in and saying, I've got a baseline. I've got a baseline from where I'm starting, and this is going to be my growth projection, and this is how I'm going to measure it. And these are the tactics by which I'm going to make that happen. So that's really, really important. So if you're new to the C-suite, there's a couple of things you need to know. First and foremost, you have to show up authentically. You have to own your brand. You have to own who you are, and you need to be responsible for how you show up to people. And a lot of that is customer service driven. If you tell people you're going to get back to them, are you really getting back to them? Is that something you want to measure, or have your executive assistant measure for you? How many phone calls are coming into my office? How quickly are we returning those phone calls? How successful are those communications? And what are they telling us? Are we forecasting? So as a C-suite executive in the K-12 space, you need to be proud of how you show up after you've decided how you're going to show up. And if you've done all that hard work, maybe as part of your program, your certification program, as part of your master's or doctorate program, put it into practice by building a visual brand for yourself. Start showing up on social media. Start going live on Facebook. Start creating YouTube videos. Start submitting yourself for presentations at conferences. Start a podcast just like this. Start getting out there so that people know who you are, what you're about. So when you're interviewing, there is a digital footprint that spans a length of time that reinforces who you say you are and what it is you say you're going to do. And that's really, really important. So if you are lucky enough in a school district to have tools that utilize that, make sure you're tapping into them, which is probably a really good time to just pause for just a second and thank K-12 Insight, the official podcast sponsor of School Leader Soundbites, because they have some great tools that measure those kinds of things. So if you're looking for some ways to measure communication, to assign some metrics, and not only for yourself, but potentially for your fellow cabinet members, then be sure to reach out to them. You can reach them at k12insight.com/SOPHER and let them know that Veronica sent you. One of their awesome salespeople will reach out and connect with you. All right. So let's wrap up what we talked about today. I have been working with new executives in central office. And some of the things I'm seeing is that we are not showing up authentically. We are not owning our brand, and we are not tracking our successes so that we can easily measure that. So make sure you start doing those 3 things. You want to show up authentically. You want to proudly be who you are, and you want people to know the minute they meet you what you're about and how you're going to support students in their growth. So, with that, I'm wrapping up this episode and thanking you so much for joining us on School Leader Soundbites. Make sure you hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes. And if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop me some comments. I would absolutely love to connect. If you have any questions about the services I provide, you can reach me at veronicavsofer.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.